Week one is here, and I am here to help you with not only your waiver wire pickups, but some start sit advice and some early season roster management. Let's get to it. Don't forget to do all the things you normally do. Like, share, subscribe, hit that notification icon. You stay up to date. We're dropping weekly waiver wire fantasy content. We're getting you ready for the 2026 NFL draft as well this week. So we're going to start with some start sit advice, and then we'll hit the waiver wire. Obviously, early season, you want to trust your studs. But that being said, sometimes we've got injuries. You know, if you drafted a guy like a Chris Godwin, he probably won't be back for, a few weeks, or even some of these other guys. Ayuk's. I mean, we know we've got some of the higher end fantasy players going to be out for a few weeks. I want to go through some of the different positions and talk through some of the guys that I would definitely be looking to start. And then some of the guys that maybe I would look elsewhere this week. Anybody starting against Saints, I'm probably going to look at putting them in my lineups. Obviously, this week it's the Arizona Cardinals. So if you've got Kyler Murray, I would definitely consider Marvin Harrison Jr. I would consider, Connor, Trey Benson. That defense, the Cardinals defense against probably Spencer Rattler. It's certainly one of those things where I'm looking at starting as many Cardinals as I can. But when you look at it, and we're going to use Fantasy Pros for our list here as we talk through this. So if you have another site you like to use, feel free, drop it in the comments. I will gladly talk about it in future videos, but I go with Fantasy Pros. Obviously, we know the top probably 5, 6, 7 guys are almost must starts. The only consideration here that I would be thinking through would be Jaden Daniels against the Giants. The Giants have a really good defense. They got a lot of good edge rushers. Are we going to see a year 2 slump with our quarterback here? So he would certainly be one that I'm probably going to play, depending on where you drafted him and who your other quarterback is. But he would certainly be one I would consider looking elsewhere. I'm definitely starting Baker against Atlanta. I feel good. Patrick against the Chargers it should be a good matchup. Kyler against New Orleans it's probably my favorite start each week is whoever's going against the Saints this year. Bo Nix versus Tennessee should be a good one. Tennessee still trying to change things over and turn over a new leaf, but that means Nix should have a good opportunity in week 1 to really pick them apart. In the top 10 here, Justin Fields would be one I would consider not starting. Pittsburgh almost always has a solid defense. Fields is still trying to gel with this team. I would definitely consider somebody else. If we're looking further down, I would look at Goff versus Green Bay. Obviously, he's outside of your QB1 range, but he's certainly a guy that's playable this week. I would look at Trevor Lawrence against Carolina, Justin Herbert. Even Jordan Love against Detroit might be a solid matchup. I would definitely be looking at some of these other guys if your other quarterback or your starting quarterback is Fields, Purdy, maybe a Jaden Daniels. But otherwise, start your guys. On a running back, this is pretty much a no-brainer for me. Your RB1s are easy starts this week. I feel good about most of these matchups for your RB1s. Obviously, Achane, keep an eye on that injury report. He would be one that you might not. But I feel really good about, Jonathan Taylor all season long. I could see him finishing as a top 4, ish range running back this year and really not bat an eye about it. I feel good about the majority of this top 12 running backs that are out here, minus, guys that may be dinged up. And then we get to Kenneth Walker against San Francisco. I would look elsewhere if possible. I feel good about Cook. I feel good about Hubbard. Kamara's going to get a ton of action just because he's probably their best weapon that's healthy right now. So he's probably playable, but it's one of those things where he might not be the most attractive fantasy option, but he should get a ton of action. So he should be viable this week. James Conner, we know that Trey Benson is going to keep getting more and more action, but I feel good about him, against New Orleans. Breece Hall against Pittsburgh. It depends on what we're doing here. You're hearing rumors that they really like Braylon Allen. Breece Hall's a really talented running back. So if he is your RB2, you're probably going to have to start him. But behind him, I would certainly be interested in David Montgomery. Aaron Jones probably against Minnesota feels like a decent matchup. I'm not necessarily interested in starting Pollard or Harvey. Pacheco is a guy I think is going to shoot up this season. I think healthy. I think he's probably going to finish in the top 20 range. I'd be okay starting him. Swift for Minnesota, I'm looking elsewhere. Certainly Travion Henderson. I mean, he's looked good in the preseason. He would be one that I would definitely be in consideration for starting. And then once you jump down, Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne, I think should have a decent production this week. I would lean Bigsby over Etienne. From there, Javonte Williams in Dallas, I think feels like a guy that you don't want to be leaning on unless you're desperate. Rashad White against Atlanta feels like a solid play as well. Eckler versus the Giants should be okay. Probably not my favorite, but if you're needing to start a second running back and you're wrestling with it, maybe you drafted an injured guy, these would be some of those guys that I would certainly consider this far down. If you have a specific player that you're wondering about, obviously comment below. I'll be watching these comments and I'll do my best to help you out. Receiver, in week one, I always say start your studs. As long as your studs are healthy, all these guys feel like good plays. I mean, your top 11, 12, probably your top 12 should be no-brainers. Obviously you're starting in Jigba. It'll be interesting to see how him and Darnold sync up throughout the season. I feel good about Higgins. Devontae Adams really should finish in the top 10. It would not surprise me. Marvin Harrison Jr. feel good about. Tyreek Hill should be. I mean, really, you're looking all the way down. I really don't start having concerns until we get to probably 22 with Ted McMillan, just because he's a rookie, and how he develops the chemistry with Bryce Young and what that looks like. But then after that, I mean, all these guys are real playable. I feel confident that they should produce decent fantasy value for you. So you're probably your top 2 to 3 receivers should be easy smash plays. Ridley, I fully expect to finish probably in the top 20, 25-ish range. He should get peppered with targets all season. I feel good about him all week, every week, as long as he's healthy. Jacoby Myers, I'm definitely not playing. He just requested a trade, and I don't feel super excited about his fantasy production, even if he didn't request a trade. But basically from 35 on, now we're starting to look at matchups. Pittman should be a decent chain mover type play. So I would be okay with Pittman. Jaden Reed should get peppered with targets because he's got the confidence of his quarterback. But, he's in a tough matchup against Detroit. Josh Downs dealing with injury. Cooper Kupp feels like a fairly safe play if you need a flex option and you're dealing with injuries. I'm probably okay with Pearsall as well because he's most likely their wide receiver 1. So probably option number 2 or 3 in the passing game behind Kittle and McCaffrey. Mims, absolutely okay playing. Coleman in case of emergency. But once you're getting down to this range, Dobbs normally has the trust of his quarterback, but he's been dealing with some drop issues. Adam Thielen just got traded back to Minnesota. Does that mean he's good value early in the season because they've got Addison he's forced to sit out a few weeks. But I'm certainly not going to jump the gun and throw him in my lineups this week. I'd look elsewhere. And this is where you're really getting to matchup-based guys. Anybody late that I'm really interested in playing would probably be, Lockett could be a guy just because he's a vet and he could be trusted. Michael Wilson, is kind of an in case of emergency type play, but he's probably their third or fourth option in the passing game. A.D. Mitchell could be a really fun play just because of the injuries ahead of him, depending on what that looks like. And from there on out, I'm not really interested in jumping on any of these guys. Pat Bryant could be a sneaky play. After that, I'm really not throwing any of these guys in my lineup. So hopefully you don't have to. But if you do, if you have a guy further down, throw him in the comments and I'll give you my opinion, do my best to help you out there. On a tight end, obviously you're starting your studs. I feel good about the majority of these guys. Hawkinson's one that all year long I'm going to feel very uncomfortable with. But you probably drafted him as your tight end once. You're going to have to ride with him. Kelsey, Ingram. I would rather start. So Tucker Kraft is a guy that I definitely want to start each week. Ferguson, Goddard feels good. Hunter Henry should be trusted by his quarterback. Rookie tight ends, I'm not jumping on starting just yet. I'd rather them as my TE2 so I can watch as they go throughout the season. Kyle Pitts is another guy that I really, I continue to wait for him to break out, but so far nothing. I'd probably slide Dalton Kincaid up a little bit. I'm probably bumping down, 8, 9, and I'm moving up, 10, 11, 12. I'm starting these guys over them. If you're looking late, I'm really not interested in any of these guys. Brenton Strange would be one that I'd feel pretty good about producing decent value. Freiermuth, I think, is another guy that should finish better than his ranking currently. But, as you look down the list, Schultz is a tight end too. He really should finish higher than some of these other players. After that, all bets are off. As much as I love Cole Kmet, Noah Fant, Theo Johnson, these are all guys that I really like. I got to see something to really get excited about. And, and with Kmet, he's probably tight end too. And that is in a Ben Johnson offense, tight end too will get something, but he's like a best ball tight end at this point because, he's only really going to produce a few games a year, depending on what that looks like, because they have a lot of options there. All right. So Kickers, you're starting your studs, you're starting the guys that you drafted. I mean, basically, I would put Tyler Bass into the must-start weekly guys. I would move Loop down. Jake Bates a must-start. Ryland, I would move down a little. Cam Little, I think everyone's excited about him just because, he booted a 70-yarder, but he's probably a back-end kicker one for me. Outside of that, I trust. I mean, I really trust all these guys. I'd move Bass and Bates up a little bit, move Ryland down a little bit, kind of where I'm at there. If you guys have a kicker question, always drop it. I'm glad to help. Defense, special teams, Arizona Cardinals. Make sure you're playing them if you got them. If you didn't grab one of these top few ones, I'd feel really good about Arizona just because they're going against New Orleans. You got to think that they get sacks, some sort of level of sacks production there, probably more than interceptions, but maybe they get interception too, and that gets you a little excited. Feel good about, Denver against a rookie quarterback should be a fun one just because Denver's defense disguised a lot of things, and that might be a little hard for a rookie quarterback. Pittsburgh could just because, Justin Fields, I mean, does he give them a little bit extra in terms of opportunity for an interception or sack? Pretty solid choice. Philly, I'm not gonna say don't start them, but I certainly, we'll look at a different matchup. Obviously Arizona feels good this week. The Jets could be a fun one this week just because there will be potential there with a aging quarterback that you're going after. Commanders, again, they have a pretty good defense and going in a pretty good matchup there. Cincinnati versus Cleveland. I don't know that I'm jumping all over it. Cincinnati's defense, is okay. Nothing exciting. I would probably be okay with, looking at Colts versus Miami. Could be a fun one. Tampa Bay versus, Michael Penix in his first full season as a starter. Could be a fun one. You go down the list. Those are some of the ones I'd be okay with. When we're looking at IDP, you start your studs. I mean, it's one of those things where IDP is a lot easier for me to say just lock in your studs and be good there. I do want to hit it though because I am an IDP guy and we got lots of IDP fans in the community, so I want to make sure we touch on it a little bit. I don't really feel bad about any of these top matchups, any of these top positions, depending on how deep your starting rosters are. A rookie linebacker starting, that one I feel a little bit concerned about. I try to look elsewhere. Other than that, rookies on the IDP side of things, I really do try to be mindful of. I'm rostering, but I'm not jumping all over early in the season until I see how they've picked up the defense. Other than a guy like a Travis Hunter, if he plays both ways, I mean, that's just ridiculous potential for fantasy output. So, you're going there. Trey Hendrickson, because he's, hasn't done anything in camp and he's still getting his game legs under him. Does he struggle the first week or two? Because he's going against Cleveland, I feel good about putting him in my lineup just because Cleveland is kind of one of those teams where I don't really know what to expect this season. Do they figure things out or do they keep struggling? Trey Hendrickson is a good enough edge rusher that I would just take that and run with it. Looking at these top positions. I mean, there really isn't anyone I'd definitely tell you not to play at this point. But if you have an IDP specific question, drop it in the comments. With that being said, let's get to waiver wires. All right. Now, waiver wires, I'm talking more specifically for your redraft guys. You dynasty guys, you know that these players are all going to be rostered. If you have specific questions on the dynasty side of things, drop them in the comments and I'll get to them. But it's definitely more for the guys that are just playing season-long redraft type stuff. I'm going to use Yahoo and ESPN. I'm going to bounce back and forth just so you can kind of get a feel for what I'm seeing. These are 12 and 10 team leagues that I'm looking at the free agents and the waiver wire options. In terms of quarterbacks, there's a couple of startable guys out here, guys that you could put on your roster that could be plays each week. Stafford, Cam Ward, I would certainly consider Daniel Jones is a guy that's probably a nice QB2, potentially just with his running ability and the fact that team has some weapons. He certainly could produce a little bit better than a guy like Russell Wilson. Sam Darnold, I think he could produce well in that Seattle offense, but I'm going to hold for future. If I'm looking at the positions here, Stafford is good for me. I feel good about Cam Ward as a QB2 as we watch him throughout the season. Maybe he can develop a little bit and become a more viable fantasy option. Geno, feel pretty good back with Pete Carroll. And then Daniel Jones, and the same goes over on the ESPN side of things. They've got a little bit of difference. So you're seeing a few other guys here. JJ sitting out there, Trevor Lawrence. These guys are rosterable. I think Trevor Lawrence, Stafford, Cam Ward, Geno, those are probably guys I feel good about. Daniel Jones, these are all guys that could potentially give you decent fantasy production throughout the season. And these are, QB2 type guys. Tua I love and is a very good football player, but the injury concern is always going to be there. So I'd rather let somebody else jump on that grenade, and I'll just look elsewhere. Moving over to the running backs. We'll start on the ESPN side of things just so we can bounce back and forth. Obviously, not touching Brian Robinson at the moment just until we see him in that offense and see what we're looking at. Trey Benson, I'd roster him in a heartbeat. Najee Harris should be rostered. Jalen Wright should be rostered. Dylan Sampson could wind up being their RB1 on the year, depending on what happens with Judkins. Those are probably the safest guys to roster at this point. But there are other guys that could be depth guys to grab at some point. Rodriguez, Roshan Johnson, Blake Corum, probably guys that could get run throughout the season. Jumping over to the Yahoo side of things, let's look at those running backs over there. Rachaad White is a guy that I feel pretty solid, could be a nice flex piece throughout the season. When Tajay Spears comes back, I would roster him as well. He's a very talented running back. Ollie Gordon could get some run in Miami, but I'm not jumping on him just yet. Obviously Jalen Wright I would jump on before I jumped on Gordon. And the same here. Corum, Kyle Monangai could be a really fun later season play as he gets time in this offense, and as the inevitable with DeAndre Swift happens. Roshan Johnson just feels like an afterthought at this point. People seem to be kind of jumping over him, but either one of these running backs could wind up finishing the year better than Swift, and it wouldn't surprise me in the least. Emmanuel Wilson with Green Bay could wind up getting a little bit of love. But you're looking here, these guys are all under 50% rostered on Yahoo. Be that as it will, Rachaad White's the one I would jump all over if you needed some running back help. On to the wide receivers. Keon Coleman's rostered in more than 50% of the leagues, but you're seeing it again. Under 50% for a lot of these guys. Keon Coleman I'd roster. Rashad Bateman I'd feel good rostering. Hollywood Brown maybe, but I'm not jumping all over him. Dobbs tends to be trustworthy to love, but his drops issue, like I said earlier. Tesla is a guy that could be interesting with them trading Tim Patrick. Could be, you could be looking at their wide receiver 3 or probably option number 4 or 5 in the offense. So I'm not jumping all over him, but he could be a guy later in the season. Quentin Johnston, he just hasn't really, we can't keep making fetch a thing here with him. So I'd leave him out there. Tyler Lockett is a sneaky guy just because because he's a vet, could become kind of a big play threat for Cam Ward when folks are going to be looking to Ridley first and foremost. So he might be a nice flex play down the road. I'm probably only grabbing Coleman and Bateman though off the waiver wire here. Jumping over to ESPN, Bateman is there as well. Amari Cooper in Vegas is interesting, but I'm not doing anything about that yet. Michael Wilson, kind of is up and down throughout the season most of the time, so I'm not jumping all over. I mean, here Bateman is kind of the where I'm at with. Let's see what we got here. Anyone over? We got 2 guys over 50% rostered. I'm not jumping all over Adam Thielen just at his age, but early season, if you needed a receiver, he's probably going to get to play early season just because he knows that offense, and they've got Addison that's going to be out for a little bit. So if you have a receiver that you're looking for, you let me know in the comments. We're moving over to tight end, kind of the who's who of guys that I wouldn't jump all over. Strange, Freiermuth, Dalton Schultz, I would be okay with. Otherwise, Theo Johnson, I love the talent. I got to see that offense start moving a little bit. Fannin could get some run throughout the season, but I'm not jumping all over him just yet. And that's kind of it. I mean, Luke Musgrave, is a guy to keep an eye on. Green Bay, Tucker Kraft has any injury issues. Maybe it becomes Musgrave's chance again. Because remember, they drafted him before Kraft, but Kraft has been really good and is a really talented tight end. So really I'm only grabbing Strange and Freiermuth. Probably Dalton Schultz if need be, but even then, he's not what he was in Dallas. Moving over to Yahoo. So Kincaid, I don't know why he isn't rostered. So I'll be making sure I pick him up. Oh yeah. I have really good tight ends in this league. That's probably why I didn't have him, but I'll be making sure I get him just because I really like Dalton Kincaid. Freiermuth should be on rosters. There should be no reason he's less than 50% rostered, and he is clearly that way. Theo Johnson, Schultz are guys to keep eye on, but, I'm not jumping all over yet. And there's that. I mean, if you guys have questions, obviously, if you have kickers and defensive questions, drop them in the comments. Those 2 positions are positions I rotate throughout the year, so you're going to see we have guys that are less than 50% rostered, and, when you play your matchups. Here, Chargers against Kansas City. I'm not like super excited about that matchup, so I would look elsewhere as well. So it makes sense why they're out there, and this week my defense of the week that I'm starting is Arizona. I've started them in both my leagues, and it's just because I want to see some boom potential week one against an offense that's going to be struggling, and we'll go from there. It could be boom and it could be bust. And that's it. If you guys have questions, drop them below in the comments. Always here to help. We've got a Discord community. If you need quicker, advanced conversations, jump in there. We'll talk to you guys later.